Foundations: A Revolutionary Start, 1775–1815. America's military origins are rooted in its struggle for independence from Britain during the Revolutionary War, 1775–1783. The early American military efforts were far from impressive. The Continental Army, led by General George Washington, lacked sufficient resources, a coherent command structure, and reliable supplies. The soldiers were often poorly trained and were made up of local militias with little experience in modern warfare. Despite these challenges, the American forces had several crucial advantages. The knowledge of the terrain was a significant benefit. The Americans were fighting a defensive war on their home soil, which allowed them to better understand the land and engage in guerrilla tactics. The French alliance, which provided not only military aid but also experienced soldiers and naval power, was another critical factor in the American victory. The Siege of Yorktown in 1781, which led to the eventual British surrender, marked the final turning point in the war, solidifying the United States' independence. In the aftermath of the war, the new nation faced the daunting task of organizing a military force capable of defending its borders and maintaining order. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first constitution, had limited military provisions, and the U.S. maintained only a small standing army and state militias. This structure proved problematic during the War of 1812, when the United States faced a resurgent Britain. The War of 1812, often referred to as America's Second War of Independence, was fought primarily over trade restrictions and British support for Native American tribes along the frontier. It highlighted serious weaknesses in the American military, including poor coordination between the Army and the fledgling Navy, as well as inadequate resources and logistics. Despite suffering setbacks such as the British burning Washington, D.C. in 1814, America managed to repel the British forces in several key battles, including the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, which gave the U.S. a renewed sense of national pride. During this period, the United States began the process of building a stronger, more professional military. While it was still focused on internal issues and territorial expansion, the seeds of military modernization were being planted, setting the stage for the future development of a powerful national defense system. Expansion and Civil War, 1815–1865. After the War of 1812, the United States entered a period of relative peace and territorial expansion. As the nation pushed westward, it faced new challenges in the form of Native American resistance and the desire to protect its expanding borders. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 led to the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans, and the military played a central role in these efforts. Over time, the Army gained experience in managing frontier conflicts and protecting settlers, leading to an increasing understanding of asymmetric warfare and counterinsurgency tactics. The United States also began to recognize the importance of a modern navy as a key instrument of power projection. This was especially true after the Mexican-American War, 1846–1848, which was fought primarily over territorial disputes. The war marked a significant expansion of U.S. territory, with the acquisition of California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. The military was instrumental in this victory, with U.S. forces engaging in both conventional battles and amphibious landings. The Navy's role in the conflict, particularly in securing California and the Pacific coast, demonstrated the importance of controlling waterways and establishing a global maritime presence. However, it was the American Civil War, 1861–1865, that truly reshaped the U.S. military and set the stage for its future prominence as a military power. The Civil War was a conflict of unparalleled scale, with nearly 2.5 million soldiers serving on both sides. The war introduced significant advancements in military technology and tactics, including the use of rifled muskets, ironclad warships, and railroads for troop and supply movements. The Civil War also witnessed the birth of modern logistics, as both Union and Confederate armies faced the monumental task of supplying and moving large numbers of troops across vast distances. The Union victory, under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, was a turning point in American military history. It demonstrated the ability of the U.S. to mobilize large-scale armies and integrate industrial capabilities into warfare. The war also laid the foundation for a more professionalized military, with the establishment of a permanent army and military academies such as West Point becoming centers for training future military leaders. The experience of total war during the Civil War also left a profound impact on the United States military thinking, especially in terms of the importance of supply chains, railroad networks, and the ability to sustain long-term conflict. These lessons would become critical in future wars, as the United States began to emerge as a more formidable military power, both at home and abroad. Industrial might and imperial reach, 1865–1917. The period following the Civil War marked a new era of industrialization for the United States, with profound implications for its military capabilities. As the nation rapidly shifted from an agrarian to an industrial economy, the potential for military innovation and power projection grew exponentially. The development of new technologies, such as railroads, telegraphs, and factories, gave the U.S. a strategic advantage in warfare, allowing for more efficient movement of troops, supplies, and information. The ability to produce weapons and munitions on a large scale made the United States a rising industrial and military power. In this period, the U.S. military began to embrace the concept of imperialism, seeking to expand its influence and territories beyond the North American continent. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was a defining moment in this transition, marking the United States' emergence as a global power with imperial ambitions. The war was sparked by the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, which led to U.S. intervention in Cuba's fight for independence from Spain. The swift and decisive victory in the conflict highlighted the effectiveness of the U.S. military, especially the Navy, and marked a shift in how the U.S. viewed its role on the world stage. The U.S. defeated Spain in a matter of months and, in the Treaty of Paris, 1898, gained Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, establishing the United States as a colonial power with territories in the Caribbean and the Pacific. The acquisition of these territories was not just about expanding land, but also about gaining critical strategic military bases that would play a significant role in future global conflicts. The U.S. also sought to assert its influence in the Asia-Pacific region, culminating in the Open Door Policy, 1899, which sought to ensure U.S. commercial access to China and prevent European powers from carving up the region. The Spanish-American War also underscored the importance of the U.S. Navy in the nation's rise to military prominence. Under the guidance of Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, who advocated for a strong naval force as the key to international power, the U.S. invested heavily in modernizing its fleet. By the end of the 19th century, the U.S. Navy had become one of the most formidable in the world, with a growing emphasis on battle fleets, battleships, and strategic naval bases across the globe. This period marked the transformation of the United States from an isolated republic to an imperial power, laying the groundwork for its future as a military superpower. World War I and the rise of the arsenal, 1917 to 1918. Although the United States initially embraced a policy of neutrality at the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the war ultimately played a key role in shaping America's military future. Prior to entering the war, the U.S. military was relatively small and outdated compared to the vast entrenched forces of the European powers. However, the unrestricted submarine warfare practiced by Germany, along with the Zimmermann telegram, which revealed a German attempt to ally with Mexico against the U.S., pushed America toward intervention in 1917. When the U.S. declared war on Germany in April 1917, it was not immediately prepared for the scale of modern industrial warfare. The American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, led by General John J. Pershing, had to quickly mobilize and train millions of soldiers. In just over a year, the U.S. raised and deployed an army of over 2 million soldiers, many of whom were sent to fight on the Western Front in Europe. The entry of the United States into the war proved to be a decisive factor. American industrial might was a key asset. The U.S. rapidly transformed its civilian manufacturing base into an arsenal of democracy, producing vast quantities of ammunition, tanks, trucks, and warships. This logistical capability allowed the Allies to overcome German forces, especially in the war's later stages. The Battle of Argonne Forest, 1918, where American troops played a central role in breaking the German lines, marked one of the final pushes toward victory. World War I was a transformative experience for the U.S. military in several ways. It demonstrated the immense potential of American industrial capacity, highlighting how the nation could outproduce its enemies and sustain a war effort over a long period. The war also exposed the need for a more organized and technologically advanced military, including tanks, machine guns, and aircraft. The Air Force saw significant development during the war, with airplanes used for reconnaissance, bombing raids, and dogfights. The war also introduced the use of convoys for securing ocean shipping lanes and protecting merchant ships from German U-boats. The U.S. Navy played a crucial role in maintaining the Allied blockade and protecting shipping, which ultimately led to Germany's defeat. However, despite its critical contribution to the war, the United States emerged from World War highs. With a policy of isolationism, the U.S. did not join the League of Nations, and its military was downsized after the war. Nevertheless, the lessons learned during the conflict, particularly the importance of industrial mobilization, technological advancement, and coordination, would prove essential for America's future military dominance in the 20th century. In summary, World War I was a defining moment for the U.S. military, as it not only contributed significantly to the Allied victory, but also marked the beginning of the United States' rise as a global military power, one that would later play a central role in shaping international affairs throughout the 20th century. World War II. The global superpower is born, 1939 to 1945. World War II was the defining event that transformed the United States into a global military superpower. When the war broke out in 1939, the United States initially adhered to a policy of neutrality, while Europe and Asia descended into conflict. However, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America was thrust into the war, marking its entry into a conflict that would reshape the global balance of power. Unlike World War I, the United States was far more prepared and willing to fully mobilize its industrial and military capabilities. The U.S. became the arsenal of democracy, supplying the Allied forces with not only troops, but also vast quantities of war material, including tanks, aircraft, ships, and ammunition. The industrial capacity of the U.S. was unmatched, and the speed at which it was able to retool its factories for wartime production was astonishing. In fact, the U.S. outproduced both Germany and Japan combined, producing over 300,000 aircraft, 80,000 tanks, and 125,000 artillery pieces during the war. This industrial might was complemented by a vast mobilization of manpower. Over 16 million Americans served in the military during World War II, including both the Army and Navy. The U.S. Army grew from just 1.5 million troops in 1940 to more than 8 million by 1945, and the U.S. Navy became the largest in the world. The U.S. military was able to engage in two major theaters of war, the European theater and the Pacific theater, defeating two of the world's most powerful military forces, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. In Europe, the U.S. played a critical role in the D-Day invasion, June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history, which was a decisive turning point in the war. The Allied forces, under General Dwight D. Eisenhower, successfully landed in Normandy and began pushing German forces back. The subsequent Battle of the Bulge, the largest battle fought by the U.S. Army during the war, was another key moment in the European campaign. U.S. forces, alongside British and Canadian troops, finally pushed into Germany, leading to the eventual surrender of the Nazi regime in May 1945. In the Pacific, the United States took a decisive role in the defeat of Japan. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy engaged in an intense series of naval battles, including the Battle of Midway, 1942, which marked a pivotal turning point by crippling Japan's naval power. The U.S. adopted an aggressive strategy of island hopping, moving closer to Japan's home islands with each victory. The war culminated in the use of atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, leading to Japan's unconditional surrender. The victory in World War II marked the United States as the undisputed global military power, not only because of its military success, but also because of its new role in shaping the post-war world. The U.S. emerged from the conflict as a nuclear power, with the ability to project force anywhere in the world. The establishment of the United Nations and the creation of permanent U.S. military bases around the world further solidified its position as a superpower. Cold War dominance, 1945–1991. The end of World War II did not bring peace, but rather led to the beginning of a new global struggle, the Cold War. This ideological and geopolitical conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union would shape the military, political, and economic landscape of the second half of the 20th century. Unlike conventional wars, the Cold War was defined by proxy conflicts, nuclear deterrence, and the competition for global influence through alliances, espionage, and economic systems. In the early years of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a nuclear arms race that would see the development and stockpiling of vast numbers of nuclear weapons. The U.S. quickly established itself as the leader of the Western Bloc, securing its military dominance through the formation of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in 1949. NATO was a collective defense alliance that committed member states to mutual defense against any attack, especially from the Soviet Union. At the same time, the U.S. also expanded its military capabilities, embracing the doctrine of containment to prevent the spread of communism. This was seen in the Korean War, 1950–1953, where the U.S. and its allies fought against North Korean and Chinese forces in an attempt to prevent the spread of communism on the Korean peninsula. The war ended in a stalemate, with the Korean peninsula divided along the 38th parallel, a symbolic victory for the U.S. in maintaining the status quo. The Cold War also led to U.S. involvement in Vietnam, where the U.S. aimed to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Despite significant military investment, the war ended in failure for the United States, as North Vietnamese forces defeated the U.S.-backed South Vietnam, leading to the fall of Saigon in 1975. The Vietnam War exposed the limitations of U.S. military power and challenged the concept of conventional warfare in the nuclear age. Nonetheless, the Cold War continued to see significant developments in U.S. military strategy and technology. The Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, proposed by President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, aimed to build a missile defense system to protect the U.S. from nuclear attack and put pressure on the Soviet Union to engage in arms reduction talks. The arms race escalated through the 1970s and 1980s, with both sides acquiring intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, submarine-launched missiles, and nuclear bombers. U.S. military power also expanded through its global military presence. By the end of the Cold War, the United States maintained military bases around the world and had formed strategic alliances in key regions, including Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The ability to project military power anywhere on the globe, along with the U.S.'s technological superiority in areas like satellite communications, intelligence gathering, and stealth technology, cemented its status as the world's preeminent military superpower. The Cold War ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the United States as the undisputed global military leader. Its military strength, technological prowess, and ability to build and sustain alliances put it in a dominant position as the sole remaining superpower at the close of the 20th century. The Gulf War and the rise of technological warfare, 1990–1991. The Gulf War, 1990–1991, marked a defining moment in the post-Cold War era and demonstrated the overwhelming technological superiority of the United States military. When Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait in August 1990, the international community led by the United States swiftly responded. The U.S. formed a coalition of over 30 nations under the banner of the United Nations to liberate Kuwait and prevent Iraq from threatening the region's stability and oil supplies. The conflict began with a massive air campaign called Operation Desert Storm, which launched over 1,000 sorties a day. The United States used its cutting-edge military technology to gain a significant advantage over Iraqi forces, The U.S. military's precision bombing capabilities were on full display, with smart bombs and laser-guided missiles allowing for pinpoint strikes on critical infrastructure, military targets, and command centers. The use of these technologies drastically minimized collateral damage and civilian casualties, which was a stark contrast to the mass bombings of previous conflicts. The air superiority of the U.S. was so complete that by the time ground operations commenced in Operation Desert Sabre in February 1991, Iraq's military was already severely weakened. The U.S. Navy, with its fleet of aircraft carriers, played a pivotal role in dominating the skies, while U.S. Army and Marine Corps ground forces advanced swiftly through the desert. The Highway of Death, a stretch of road where retreating Iraqi forces were bombarded with airstrikes, symbolized the overwhelming force and technological advantage that the U.S. brought to bear in the conflict. The Gulf War was a stark reminder of the power of modern, technology-driven warfare. The ability to conduct fast, efficient, and accurate military operations using satellite reconnaissance, GPS, and stealth technology significantly reduced the need for prolonged, large-scale ground combat. The war's rapid success served as a demonstration of the United States' unmatched military might and established the U.S. as the leading military power in the world at the time. It also set the stage for future military interventions, where high-tech weapon systems and strategic precision would be key to achieving rapid victory. The Gulf War also highlighted the importance of information warfare and psychological operations. The U.S. military used media manipulation to shape both the battlefield and public perception, broadcasting the war in real time on television and creating an image of overwhelming American military dominance. This information warfare aspect would become increasingly important in future conflicts, where controlling the narrative of a war could have as significant an impact as physical combat. The War on Terror and the expansion of U.S. military power, 2001-present. The events of September 11, 2001, marked a watershed moment in U.S. history and significantly changed the trajectory of its military power. The terrorist attacks orchestrated by Al-Qaeda resulted in the deaths of nearly 3,000 people and forever altered the global security landscape. In response, President George W. Bush declared a war on terror, initiating a global campaign to eliminate terrorist organizations and prevent further attacks on U.S. soil. The initial phase of the war on terror focused on Afghanistan, where the Taliban regime had provided sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. The U.S. military, along with its NATO allies, launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001, swiftly toppling the Taliban government. However, the conflict quickly transformed into a prolonged insurgency as Al-Qaeda and the Taliban continued to resist U.S. and allied forces. Despite the challenges, the U.S. military demonstrated its ability to conduct precision strikes against terrorist targets, leveraging advanced technologies such as drones, satellite intelligence, and special operations forces. While the intervention in Afghanistan was initially viewed as a quick victory, the war evolved into one of the longest conflicts in U.S. history. The United States found itself involved in a complex counterinsurgency operation, trying to rebuild a nation while simultaneously fighting a shadowy network of terrorist groups. This war highlighted the limitations of conventional military power when faced with irregular warfare, the challenges of nation-building, and the complexities of dealing with an enemy that was not confined to traditional battlefields. In 2003, the United States expanded its military presence into Iraq, citing the threat posed by Saddam Hussein's alleged weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and his ties to terrorist organizations. The invasion of Iraq, known as Operation Iraqi Freedom, quickly led to the toppling of Saddam Hussein's regime. However, just like in Afghanistan, the subsequent years were marred by insurgency, sectarian violence, and the rise of terrorist organizations such as ISIS. The war in Iraq exposed significant flaws in U.S. military strategy, including the difficulty of managing post-invasion reconstruction and the failure to anticipate the deep sectarian divisions that would erupt after Saddam's removal. The War on Terror, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, marked a new era in U.S. military strategy, with an increased reliance on special operations forces, drones, and cyber warfare. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, or drones, to target terrorist leaders and militant groups became a hallmark of U.S. military operations. Drones allowed for precise strikes with minimal risk to American troops, and their use grew exponentially during the War on Terror. While the U.S. military faced setbacks and challenges in these conflicts, it also achieved several key successes. The death of Osama bin Laden in 2011, in a covert operation by U.S. Navy SEALs, was a significant symbolic victory in the War on Terror. Moreover, the U.S. military's ability to maintain a global presence through hundreds of military bases worldwide further solidified its role as the dominant military power. However, the War on Terror has also raised difficult questions about the long-term consequences of U.S. military intervention. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have strained the U.S. military, and the ongoing conflicts have shown the complexities of asymmetric warfare, the challenges of counterterrorism, and the importance of international alliances and diplomacy. Moreover, the rise of new military powers such as China and Russia has led to increased competition for global influence, forcing the U.S. to adapt its military strategies for a more multipolar world. The modern military landscape and technological advancements, 2010-present. In the modern era, the United States continues to maintain its status as a military superpower, driven by cutting-edge technology, advanced military doctrines, and a global strategic presence. The 21st century has seen the U.S. military embrace a new era of technology-driven warfare, where cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, advanced drones, and next-generation weapon systems have become integral to its operational success. The U.S. Department of Defense has increasingly focused on developing cyber warfare capabilities as the nature of global conflict has evolved. The rise of cyber attacks and information warfare means that military conflicts are no longer confined to traditional battlegrounds. The U.S. has created elite units, such as the U.S. Cyber Command, tasked with defending the nation's digital infrastructure and conducting offensive operations against adversaries. This includes preventing cyber attacks from nations such as Russia and China, which have demonstrated significant capabilities in cyber espionage and warfare. Another key aspect of the U.S. military's modern power is its unmanned aerial vehicle, UAV fleet, commonly known as drones. These drones are used for a variety of purposes, including surveillance, reconnaissance, and precision strikes against enemy targets, often in regions where it is difficult to deploy large numbers of troops. The ability to conduct surgical strikes with minimal risk to American lives has made drones a core tool in the U.S. military's arsenal, particularly in counterterrorism operations. In addition to drones, the U.S. has advanced stealth technology and hypersonic weapons that offer significant advantages in modern warfare. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, a cutting-edge stealth aircraft, represents the future of American air superiority. It is capable of evading enemy radar and providing precision strikes against high-value targets. The development of hypersonic missiles, which can travel at speeds greater than Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound, presents new challenges to defense systems globally. The U.S. is investing heavily in this area to maintain its technological edge over adversaries such as China and Russia. The U.S. Navy continues to be a cornerstone of America's military dominance, with its carrier strike groups and nuclear-powered submarines capable of projecting power around the world. The freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, undertaken by the U.S. Navy in disputed waters, particularly in the South China Sea, demonstrate the U.S.'s commitment to maintaining global maritime dominance and challenging the territorial claims of rising powers like China. In space, the U.S. military has also made significant strides with the establishment of the Space Force in 2019. As military conflicts increasingly extend into space, the Space Force is tasked with defending U.S. assets in orbit and ensuring the dominance of space for national security. This includes protecting satellite systems, which are vital for communication, navigation, and intelligence gathering. The modern U.S. military is also focused on global partnerships and coalitions, maintaining a network of allies and partners who share common interests in preserving the rules-based international order. Through organizations like NATO, the Quad, US, Japan, India, and Australia, and bilateral defense agreements, the United States continues to leverage its military power as a tool for global leadership. The military has also prioritized the readiness of its forces, adapting to new types of warfare, such as hybrid warfare, which blends conventional military force with cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and proxy wars. This flexibility has allowed the U.S. to remain at the forefront of military power, addressing new challenges and threats, whether in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, or the Indo-Pacific region. The U.S. military's ability to adapt to emerging technologies and threats has ensured its continued position as the dominant global force. With increasing competition from nations like China and Russia, the U.S. must continue to innovate and invest in new technologies to maintain its military edge. The future of American military power and challenges ahead, 2025 and beyond. As we look to the future, the United States faces both challenges and opportunities in maintaining its position as the world's foremost military superpower. The geopolitical landscape is shifting, with China and Russia increasingly asserting themselves as global military players, challenging the U.S. in key regions like the South China Sea, Eastern Europe, and the Arctic. The evolving nature of warfare, including cyber attacks, space operations, and the development of autonomous systems, will require the U.S. military to continue evolving. One of the most pressing challenges for the U.S. will be how to respond to the rise of China as a global military competitor. China has dramatically increased its defense spending over the past few decades and is rapidly modernizing its military. This includes the development of anti-ship ballistic missiles, which threaten the U.S. Navy's dominance in the Pacific, and artificial intelligence in military applications, which could shift the nature of warfare. In addition, China's Belt and Road Initiative is extending its influence globally, raising concerns about the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. The U.S. must also grapple with the growing importance of cybersecurity. As nations increasingly turn to cyber attacks as a means of warfare, the U.S. must invest heavily in defensive and offensive cyber capabilities. The U.S. has already experienced high-profile cyber attacks, such as the SolarWinds hack, which targeted U.S. government and corporate systems. To maintain its military edge, the U.S. will need to protect its digital infrastructure and ensure that its cyber forces are capable of defending the nation from both state and non-state actors. Another key area for the future is the development of space capabilities. With the Space Force now operational, the U.S. is preparing for a new era of military conflict in space. The growing militarization of space, including the potential for space-based weapons, satellite defense, and space mining, presents both opportunities and risks. The U.S. must continue to invest in space technology and establish international norms and regulations to ensure that space remains a domain for peaceful cooperation rather than conflict. Moreover, the U.S. will need to maintain its nuclear deterrence while avoiding nuclear proliferation. The threat of nuclear war remains ever present, especially with countries like North Korea and Iran seeking to develop nuclear capabilities. The U.S. must continue to modernize its nuclear arsenal while pursuing arms control agreements with Russia and China to reduce the risks of a global nuclear conflict. In conclusion, the future of American military power will be shaped by the ability to adapt to new technologies, maintain alliances, and counter emerging threats. As the U.S. faces challenges from both state and non-state actors, its military must continue to innovate and modernize while remaining a force for global stability and security. The evolution of military power is an ongoing process, and the U.S. will have to balance its traditional strengths with the realities of an increasingly complex and interconnected world.